Welcome into Floyd Street's Finest, powered by the Field of 68. We're talking Louisville basketball all year long. We got, I guess we'll call it a big blue invasion on the pod today, as we do every year before the UK UofL basketball game. Absolutely thrilled and excited and honored to have Kentucky leading basketball scorer Dan Issel, NBA Hall of Famer, back. And, of course, my guy Cam Drummond for the Lexington Herald-Leader covering Kentucky basketball. Guys, thanks so much for joining back on the pod. We did get big time by one James Strebel, I guess, if you could call it big timing. But I do appreciate you guys. We're having a lot of fun talking Louisville and Kentucky today.
Absolutely. Good to be with you, Jack.
Likewise, always a pleasure to be on Floyd Street's Finest with you. And
Yes.
Also with the real guest of honor here, Dan Issel.
Yes, I mean, this is, yeah, no, Dan is the guest of honor here. Like, we're not beating anything around the bush. It's always great catching up with you guys. The first thing when Dan and I popped on the Zoom waiting for Cam was, Jack, that beard looks like shit. I was like,
Look, I was one of the people who encouraged Jack to keep it out.
yeah, now I know you've been lying to me all this time.
You test drove it, I think a few months ago at this
Yeah.
point. And I was like, sure, why not? I mean, I'm rocking a mustache here like it's 1973. Throw all the appearances out the window. It looks great, Jack. Keep rocking it.
Jack, I'm just jealous. I couldn't grow that in 100 years. I tried to go one year when I was playing for the Colonels. I tried to grow a mustache because my great friend and roommate Louis Dampier had one. And after about 6 weeks, you still couldn't see it. So I'm just jealous.
Who was the one that told you to finally pull the plug? It's done.
I believe that was Mrs. Issel.
That makes sense. Anyways, again, Floyd Street's Finest, powered by the Field 68 Podcast Network. You can follow Dan on Twitter at DanIssel44, Cam at CDrummond97, and I'm at Jack Grossman97. Dan, I know I asked you this last year, but to follow up, you still have someone else running the Twitter for you? Or rather just tell, is it still the same process of you tell them what to tweet and then they tweet it for you?
No, I don't even tell them, Jack. They just tweet stuff. If you ask me how to tweet something, I wouldn't have a clue. I'm so old that I've managed to stay off social media entirely because I think it just gets you more in trouble than anything else. So I'm not a big Twitter guy.
Fair, very fair. I am. It's a drug, Dan, so it's best to stay off it before you get hooked. It's the best way of putting it. But of course, what we're talking about, Louisville, Kentucky, KFC Yum Center, Tuesday night, a top 10, top 11 matchup, depending on where they land in the new AP poll that comes out Monday afternoon. Guys, this is the most hyped up Louisville, Kentucky game we've had, I'd argue, probably since 2019 when Kentucky had the Nick Richard, Emmanuel Quickley game. Louisville had Jordan Wara, and that team went into overtime. Kentucky ended up winning in Rupp Arena. It feels like we're getting back to the place that the rivalry belongs in terms of a national relevance, with both teams having such high expectations going into the year.
Yeah, I would agree completely, Jack. I think, it's not, when you're not any good, it's really not a rivalry. And I think, Louisville went through some bad times when Kenny was there. And believe me, I was the biggest booster of Kenny Payne of anybody out there. I was shocked when he didn't do any better than he did. And of course, I love Cal. I'll never say a bad word about Cal, but Mark has brought new enthusiasm to this program. And Pat and Mark have both done a great job. And I think, quite frankly, you need a younger guy to deal with the transfer portal and NIL. I think that's why Williams got out. I think that's why Coach K got out. When you're that age and it changes that much, it's hard to make those adjustments. But both of these coaches both of them have great teams, and I'm really looking forward to Tuesday night.
Yeah, and just to follow up with what Dan said there, I echo all those thoughts completely. When since I started covering the Kentucky men's basketball program, my first two Kentucky Louisville games were the Kenny Payne era games. The 20-point beatdown in Kentucky, and then another 20-point beatdown over in Louisville, where half the crowd was UK fans. Obviously, a lot of juice came back to the rivalry last year, simply because both fan bases were energized after some tail end periods with Coach Cal, and then the KP era disaster. But even then, I think, you maybe didn't know what you had completely, at least in Pat Kelsey's case, after Louisville took some early season losses, beginning his first season at the helm. But the hype around this matchup, we've had a whole off season. We knew that it was going to be early on the calendar, probably a lot earlier than a lot of people would have liked. And I'm sure we'll get into the positioning of the game and whatnot. But the fact that both teams are coming in with legitimate Final Four national championship aspirations, the fact that they came in after big early season wins, especially in the case of Louisville, Kentucky with the hype of the preseason exhibition win over Purdue. I mean, the juice is back, right? We're going to have plenty of content over at Kentucky.com and Kentucky.com/sports this week, basically saying that, like, the rivalry, Louisville, Kentucky, the hatred, the war of words in the media, the pleasantries, shall we say, between players and fan bases, it's all back. So I can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, you had the verbal exchange over the summer between, did you hear about this, Dan, about between Mark Pope and Pat Kelsey trying to recruit a kid? Did you hear about this
No.
at all? Yeah, there was, this actually happened in Atlanta. I'm disappointed I didn't know this was happening the night of. I would have gone out and done a stakeout to be able to watch all this. But basically, the rumor goes there's this kid, Tate Kenny, who has ironically now committed to Kansas. So neither Louisville or Kentucky got him.
Kentucky and Louisville having a big recruiting war of words, that Kansas gets the kid after all, that Bill Self just comes in and gets him.
Yep. But Mark Pope had a meeting with the kid at midnight. Kelsey had one at 12:15. Pope was running late, so Kelsey just went in and did the meeting. And then when he comes out, Pope's there, and he's like, why the heck did you take my time slot? And they had some sort of verbal altercation that had happened. And it's so we had that whole thing. We had Cason Pryor after Louisville's most recent game is leaving the podium and goes, "We'll see you guys after a win on Tuesday. F them," which has sparked all the normal Twitter nonsense. So the juice. I was a little worried about the juice, Dan. That the game was so early that people weren't used to it. It seems like, especially the Cason Pryor thing a few days ago, has kind of brought this back to where we have our normal. We have our normal mashing between the two fan bases that we're used to.
Yeah, I like the early schedule, and it looks like some of these other teams are playing really tough teams. It's not like the normal schedule, Jack, where the first 8 or 10 games are games that you'd have to fall flat on your face to lose. I mean, the other night I watched Kansas and North Carolina. And of course, Patino lost in Madison Square Garden for the first time in 100 years, playing a good game. I like that. I don't know if I was Mark or Pat, for that instance. I don't know what I would learn about my team beating somebody by 50 points. I mean, I like these games. I like that they're competitive, that they're on the line. And in the real scheme of things, if you lose the game this early in the season, it doesn't matter anyway.
It does to the fans. This one matters. That's my thing. I agree with everything you're saying, Dan. I love big games early in the season. There should be more big games early in the season, and we're seeing that become more of a thing in college basketball.
Yeah.
And you look at Louisville and Kentucky's schedule, the amount of big games both teams are playing. I mean, Kentucky has games against, they have the Champions Classic. They have Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge, St. John's on the schedule, Indiana on the schedule, Gonzaga later in the year as well. They have all these games.
Well, wait a second, Jack. You can't lump that Indiana in with those others.
Indiana scored 100 points today, Dan, against an actual power conference opponent. So Jack Grossman is just flying high, close to the sun. He's like Icarus right now. We'll see if that holds.
It's the rub of the football team. the excitement there that's rubbing off a
Yeah,
little bit.
I think your football team's scoring more points than your basketball team will.
They did score 100 on Shaka Smart on Sunday. They became the first team to ever score 100 on Shaka Smart in regulation.
He had that stat ready to go.
I did, but I'll great. Like you can push Indiana to the side. Like realistically, I think Indiana will be better than they've been, but they're obviously, I agree, they're not on the same level as all these other teams that we're talking about. Louisville has games against Tennessee, Arkansas. They have a lot of local rivalry games that they're bringing back as well with Cincinnati and Memphis. I would rather them open up with any of those games before you get to the Kentucky game, just because Kentucky Louisville, yes, I'm with you. It's a great game. You learn a lot about your team, but the Kentucky Louisville game shouldn't be about learning about your team. It shouldn't be that first litmus test of a game. Like last year in the first week of the season, Kentucky plays Duke and they beat Duke, and that's the holy crap moment. This team is much better than we thought it even might be. Louisville gets humbled by Tennessee in the first week of the season. It's like, okay, now we know how far we have to go. Kentucky Louisville shouldn't be a litmus test game. Kentucky Louisville's a midterm or a final exam type game. That's what you should be working towards, not figuring out how far you need to go as a team for the rest of the season. Nothing, neither of you guys on that one.
I was deferring to Dan. It was his point that you just did character assassination.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, I disagree. I think it's great that they're playing this early, and you're right. It does matter to the fan base, but you might as well get that behind you. Either be the braggy or the bragor, one of the two.
It is weird, Cam. It is weird that it's before the football game, right?
Well, I was going to say, one of the oddest things from our perspective here in Lexington, boots on the ground, is just that it's happening so early before the football game that almost feels like an out-of-body experience. And obviously, this isn't the dominant headline for Kentucky going into this game because they very much have enough talent on the court and available players on roster to win this game, despite it being in Louisville and the Cardinals boasting such a talented lineup. But not having Jaden Quaintance as well, the fact that he's not going to be playing, obviously this wouldn't matter if the game was happening this coming Tuesday, 3 weeks from Tuesday, even maybe a month and a half from Tuesday. But just the fact that the whole picture of Kentucky basketball's roster really isn't going to come into view until early, maybe even mid-January when SEC play rolls around, that maybe just tones down the, forward-looking projections of this game just a tad. But I think it's more than made up for, obviously, in each fan base's desire to want to win the game. Like you alluded to earlier, Jack, the kind of war of words that spilled out from Pryor's comments. And also the fact that both teams spent heavily and appear to spend wisely in the transfer portal in terms of a roster building approach. Obviously, there's going to be some talented freshmen on display as well, with the Wildcats boasting the two Kentucky kids in Jasper Johnston, Malachi Moreno, Mikael Brown Jr. looking every bit like the projected lottery pick top 10 selection through Louisville's first two games. So the talent on the court will be, obviously of high level, brand name ESPN game, what you want for an early season matchup. But I do think one of the kind of things that to keep in mind with Kentucky is that this is still not going to quite be the full picture Wildcats team that many people are taking into account when they're making those Final Four and potentially even national title projections.
Where does Jaden Quaintance fit in on that?
In terms of what Kentucky could be going forward?
Yeah.
I think he's a huge part of the equation, to be completely honest. What he did last year at Arizona State, as young as he was playing at, 17 years old for the season, the defensive capabilities he had specifically as a rim protector. Now, obviously, you have to take into account recovery from ACL, time away from the court. How long will it take him to shake off rust? What does shaking off rust look like? Playing in the SEC, potentially the best conference in college basketball again this year. But I think, to a man, when we've talked to national experts, prognosticators, or even UK fans out in the wild, when they're thinking about the potential of raising banner number 9, certainly Mark Pope in this regard as well, they all envision Jaden Quaintance playing a large part in that. And that's not to excuse any performances or potential defeats that happened in the non-conference season, because again, Kentucky has plenty of talent. They certainly spend enough money to have players to deal with the absence of a Jaden Quaintance, but I do think that a lot of people think he's going to have a large percentage of something to do with whatever UK accomplishes in the NCAA tournament and in the national postseason.
Cam, are you do you have a pretty good idea? You have referenced what they spent in the portal. Do you have any idea or a pretty good idea of what kind of money that we're talking about?
Yeah, so it's actually great that you brought that up. We had a tremendous series of stories done by the real Kentucky basketball reporter at the Lexington Herald-Leader, my good colleague Ben Roberts, that came out just a few weeks ago.
Hold just a second.
Sure,
Ken,
sure.
you're so much better than Ben. It's a joke. Go ahead.
Look, I get all the praise when I appear on Jack and Years Old station, ESPN 680, all the time from Strebel and Louie about being better than Ben. So please, no more comments, or it really gets to my head. But my colleague Ben Roberts had a great series of articles focused on the NIL approach that Pope and the Wildcats have taken, specifically this offseason before the House settlement went into effect, because it was kind of the true Wild West for a bit, where spending went unchecked and NIL deals didn't have to go through the third-party clearinghouse that's established now. But we're looking at least in the low $20 million. I believe 22 million is the figure that my colleague Ben Roberts reported, and that's without taking into account additional NIL deals that trickle out, throughout the season. If anyone remembers the Jacob Toppin AT&T commercial, infamously from a few March Madness tournaments ago, stuff like that's not baked into the pie. But still, that's $22 million. That's also Kentucky maybe spending a little bit more aggressively on the front end with certain players that they expect to retain into the future, simply because there was a period there where there weren't too many checks and balances, shall we say, on the NIL spending for any school. But nonetheless, you're putting together a $22 million roster. Obviously, Louisville is one of the top NIL schools out there in the country as well. A lot of the guys that these two teams targeted in the portal, they got. I mean, just look at what Pat Kelsey did with his backcourt, getting that wrapped up in what seemed to be like a 48-hour span, getting all the prolific three-point shooters that were available. Obviously, Pope and the UK strategy went more on physicality, both having depth in numbers because of what happened last year, especially at the guard spot with injuries, but also just dealing with those SEC teams who are able to bully Kentucky, getting that defense elevated. The idea of being a top 10 KenPom defense was crucial to UK's transfer portal strategy. So all that to say, there was some specific transfer portal targeting, some specific transfer portal spending that UK did in the offseason, and Tuesday night's going to be the first true official big test to see how those guys do, especially in the pressure cooker that the Yum Center is set to be.
Cam, you took the words right out of my mouth, man. I think this is, like you said, this is the first test in a game that actually counts for is Mark Pope's mission of being more physical, getting more athletic, adding more length. Is that going to pay off against Louisville's backcourt, which I'd argue is the best backcourt in the country, the best collection of guards that any team has, with Brown and Conley and Woolley, McNeely, all those guys. That to me is absolutely fascinating on did Mark Pope do enough to be able to slow Louisville down enough to win this game, because that was the thing with Kentucky last year. They were phenomenal on the offensive end. They may not be as good of a shooting team this year, which I want to get your guys' thoughts on that as well. But the trade-off is supposed to be, instead of being a top 50, top 60 defense, we're going to be a top 10, top 15 defense, be a much more rounded team, and give us a much better chance to make a Final Four and possibly win a national championship.
Well, Jack, I think, if they can come close to what they were offensively last year, I believe they were seventh in the nation in scoring offense. And so, they may not have to move up that high. Maybe just into the 20s would get them to be competitive enough. But, that's always the tough thing, is to getting these kids who have been, let's say, offensive stars their whole careers to really get down and play defense at the other end. And so, as you say, we'll see. But if they improve, 50% defensively, I think they're going to have a great team.
Well, I think, just to piggyback off that, Dan, real quick, that's been one of the most interesting things to begin this Kentucky basketball season. I mean, going all the way back to the summer, Mark Pope was pretty transparent that it seemed like he was willing to trade off at least a small amount of that offensive success from last season into significant defensive improvement. He talked about, for the first, I believe, 10 years of his head coaching career, he always went offensive installation first and then defense after that. UK totally flipped that script this year. They installed the defense before the offense. That led to some growing pains during the summer. Maybe the offense wasn't quite where it was. Anybody who watched that Nichols opener could probably, tell you as much from the cold shooting start they had. But nonetheless, based on both roster construction and, as you mentioned, Dan, Pope's desire to simply get better on defense, they finished, I think, 51st in the country last year in defensive rating. That took a huge late season improvement to even get to that mark. If they can swim anywhere closer to the top 25, top 10 being kind of that North Star goal,
Yeah.
whatever kind of offense they produce, I don't think anybody thinks it's going to trail off too much from last season, or at least it shouldn't, given the caliber of offensive talent on their roster. You put those two things together, that's a recipe for a potential national championship. I mean, Jack, you live and die by Ken Palm, amongst other basketball.
Dan hates Ken Palm. That's the ping pong ratings.
Ping pong.
Top 10, top 10
ping
offense, top 10 defense.
Game Tuesday.
What was that, Dan?
I said, what's ping pong say about the game on Tuesday?
Ping pong has Louisville by 1.
Yeah. I told you he doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's the thing, though. Like, the statistics show that you have that level of offense, that level of defense, you're swimming in Final Four national championship consideration. Obviously, actual humans play the game. It's not all statistics. But Jack, chime in with your thoughts as well. Do you think sacrificing at least a little bit of offensive production for some level of significant defensive increase is a worthy bet for Pope and the Cats to have this year?
I think it's something that had to be done based off of how last season went, because Kentucky was, they were the best 3-point shooting team percentage-wise in the country last year. They were fantastic offensively, but you saw there was a clear ceiling of what they were going to do, because every time they went up against an elite offense, they quite frankly got cooked. I mean, defensively, and then you're trying to make a deep run. If you're trying to compete with the teams we'll use last year, for example, but even this year, if you're trying to compete with, I know they beat Purdue in the scrimmage, which this might be more of it, but if you're trying to beat Purdue's offense and what Houston can do offensively, what Duke can do offensively, what, Michigan can do offensively, all these teams, what Louisville can do offensively, that's another one. Like, you have to be able to show some resistance there. And I thought, for as good of a job Mark Pope and Pat Kelsey as well did last year, getting Louisville and Kentucky back into national relevance, Louisville back into the NCAA tournament, Kentucky as a 4 seed back to the Sweet 16, both teams felt like they had hard caps with how quickly they had to put the rosters together. So we've seen both of them in slightly different ways build out much deeper rosters, much fuller rosters, and Mark Pope signaling, hey, we had a clear Achilles heel last year. We cannot have that same issue this season, I think is incredibly smart. My question to you guys is, because we saw them struggle mightily shooting the 3 against Georgetown, the exhibition. They didn't hit one. They struggled against Nicholas. They shot the ball a lot better against Valparaiso. I think it was 11-28. Do you think Kentucky can shoot the ball well enough with what they have? Did they trade off too much, or are they going to be fine there? And how much, as I get it, it was only Valparaiso, but how much does getting Jalen Lowe back in that Valpo game really help try to get everyone into the right spot of doing what Mark Pope wants them to do on that end of the floor?
Well, I think offensively they'll be fine. I mean, it's early in the year. Don't get carried away about the Valpo game. Me and you and Cam could beat Valpo, but I wouldn't expect.
Dan, you would drop 60, and Cam and I would just be trying not to do anything stupid to mess you up.
I don't expect Marino to have a double-double every night, but I think offensively they'll be fine. The guy that I really think, and you guys might disagree with this, I think the kid that's going to have a huge offensive year is Chandler. I mean, he came out as a high recruit, and then took 2 years off. And I don't care who you are, you can't take 2 years off without playing basketball and come back and expect to be the same kind of player. I think he offensively, what he hit the other night, 4 or 5 3-pointers, I think he's going to have a big year offensively. I'm not worried about the offense, but I am worried about how much they can improve defensively. I think that's always kind of been Mark's MO, how good an offensive team that he's had.
Both him and Pat Kelsey.
Yeah, and I think he realized last year that's all well and good. But if you want to hang that ninth banner, you better be able to defend somebody, because some nights that shot isn't going to go in.
Well, real quick, just to close the Ken Palm chapter, Dan, I do want you to know that Ken Palm has Kentucky as the #1 team in the country right now, despite projecting them to lose to Louisville on Tuesday.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant. That ping pong guy, I love him.
Well said, well said. And to piggyback off your point as well, I think it's kind of a great and very interesting discussion point to isolate Colin Chandler as a potential X factor for this Kentucky team. There's a lot of guys who we maybe don't know what we're going to get in terms of a year-long projection. A kid like Jasper Johnson, he's going to be a microwave scorer off the bench. He's going to have the typical freshman highs and lows. You kind of know what you're going to expect from Otega Owe, preseason SEC Player of the Year. Curious to see if his three-point shot and his jump shot in general, the mechanics on that improve as the year goes by. They brought in some heavy hitters from the portal with Aberdeen and Diabate, with ton of high-level SEC championship experience. But Colin Chandler's in year 2 of playing for Mark Pope here at Kentucky. Had last year to get acclimated to that system, get up to speed. You mentioned Dan, after that 2-year mission trip. But he's just, frankly, obviously against overmatched opponents in the first 2 games, just shown a bit of that X factor, right? Whether it's, skying for that tomahawk dunk, whether it's having a pretty consistent 3-point shot. He's already at 8 of 15 from deep this season, which if he can keep anything close to that up, look out. Mark Pope's talked about his improvement on the ball, off the ball, on defense as well. He wants to improve as a ball screen defender. If you can remember, ball screen defense was really an Achilles heel as part of UK's defensive shortcomings last year. The idea of Chandler taking a step there would be interesting. Interesting to see just what he does, because he's been filling in a bit at point guard as well. While Jalen Lowe's been out, you can shift him to the 2 guard some, but he's really an interesting kind of measuring stick, I think, and I think some people in UK media would agree with me as well. If Kentucky is to hit the highs of reaching an Elite Eight, a Final Four, a national title game, it's because Colin Chandler has broken through, had a massive season to complement some of those more experienced, proven guys in that starting lineup, in the starter level minutes, what have you.
Let me ask you guys this. So looking into the Louisville, Kentucky game more itself, we're talking about all these big picture things and look at how it might apply on Tuesday night in the Center. Louisville, what they want to do offensively, they want to push the pace. They want to play fast. Coach Lieberman on the podcast over the weekend said he kind of expects Kentucky to just try to slow the game down a bit to try to keep Louisville out of transition, which I find interesting. But my big question is, Louisville wants to get out and run. They want to shoot the 3 ball. They have all these shooters out on the court. Can UK stay in front of their man one-on-one, the Michael Browns, the Ryan Conwells, keep them from getting driving lanes to the bucket, or from, Louisville's all their cutting and off-ball movement as well? Can they stay in front of their guy that they're guarding and stay out of rotation? Because a big thing for this, you might have to make the choice if you're Kentucky, that a lot of teams are going to have to make this year of Louisville. Are you going to help on a drive or a back cut and give up a layup, or to take away a layup and give up an open 3, or are you going to stay home and make Louisville beat you with 2s? I'm very fascinated to see how Mark Pope tries to pick whatever poison he wants to take and how they try to avoid that on Tuesday.
The one thing that impressed me about Mark, well, several things impressed me about Mark last year, but Jack, I think one of the things was his ability to make adjustments in games. I love his composure on the sidelines. I mean, he's always very positive, even in the huddles, very positive, doesn't yell at the officials. I just love, and he's going to make the adjustment. I'll say 2 things. One thing that'll make it hard on Kentucky, you referenced earlier that there was a time when it was 50-50 crowd-wise. It won't be 50-50 this year. Kentucky will be lucky if they have 100 fans.
You don't think Blue's getting in, Dan?
No, I don't. Because let me tell you something. They know who owns those seats. They see a blue jersey in one of those seats. They're going to want to know how come he got there. Anyway, I would say this. The way you said Kentucky will slow down the pace. Here's the way you slow down the pace. You make baskets. If you can score on Louisville and make them take the ball out of bounds while you retreat defensively, that's going to affect the pace of the game a lot. If you're not hitting shots and they're rebounding, they're fast breaking off the rebound, then you've got a whole nother story.
Yeah, I think the idea of this game becoming or not becoming a track meet is really interesting. And Jack, I want to get your thoughts on Brown a little more specifically as well, as kind of the engine that seems to be powering a lot of what Louisville's doing specifically on the offensive end. Someone, frankly, that's caught my eye in reviewing tape, and granted, again, Louisville against two overmatched opponents in South Carolina State and Jackson State, has been the play of Ruth's. And I think we knew, I even remember covering him as a recruit, decommitted from Michigan, decided to go to Louisville. Feels like he's probably taken a significant jump in the offseason. You've referenced just the ability for Louisville to play inside out. They want to launch a bunch of three-pointers. They want to play with that fast tempo. Curiously enough, despite the offensive struggles against Nichols and the better performance against Valpo, Pope still said he wants to see UK shoot more three-pointers. They've got this mythical 35 three-pointers a game average that, frankly, they're never going to hit, but they're going to continue to use that as a guiding principle. I think
Louisville might hit that, to be honest.
Right. That's the thing. That's the kind of funny thing, is like that's the team that's probably more liable to hit or attempt at least 35 three-pointers on Tuesday night. But yeah, this is going to be the sternest test yet of Kentucky's defensive first approach this offseason. They looked really good on defense against both Nichols and Valparaiso. Pope was really complimentary not only of the actual end product in terms of forcing shot clock violations and rebounding and guarding your yard and all that stuff, but just the intensity that they played with. And honestly, against Valparaiso, something that didn't happen against Nichols was harnessing those defensive stops and using that as motivation and positive energy on the offensive end. Dan, you mentioned the idea that if you're making shots and you're forcing the other team to take the ball out of the basket, that's the easiest way to slow the game down. But also the easiest way to get into a defensive rhythm is to make shots, be able to pull back a little bit, kind of find your space. We've seen some soft full court presses so far this season. Don't know if one's going to come out on Tuesday. But yeah, Jack, I'll let you take it from here as the Louisville expert. But just containing Brown, what you've maybe seen from some of Louisville's other guards, even some of their front court guys like Ruth's that I mentioned, like this is going to be a very stern examination of the assumed defensive strides that Kentucky has made this offseason.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that we're looking at. We're going to learn a lot about on Tuesday. Number one, like we've been talking about, will Kentucky make the strides that we're thinking they will, and how will Louisville be able to do what they want offensively? Number two, Kenai Roos is a dude that put up some big stats in the first two games of the season, but again, it was South Carolina State and Jackson State. That's not Kentucky, and it's not. It just isn't. So I really like him long term. I think he's going to be a really good player. This will be a great test of, okay, you're proving that you can do this against low major teams. Now can you do it against the big boys as well? That's going to be a great question mark, as well as for Cason Pryor, who's going to be in his second game back off the ACL tear. I think he's going to play a bigger role on this team than I really thought he was going to over the summer. His energy, his athleticism, he's a type of body Louisville doesn't have on the front court other than him. I mean, he brings just a different dimension than guys like Frew and Zugris and Khalifa bring at the end of the floor, to where I think a lot of those two guys, they're going to be really big X factors, because even without Jaden Quaidens, Kentucky has a big size advantage up front. And I think the way Louisville can try to mitigate that is really where Jalen Lowe comes into the picture. I think he might be the single most important person of the game to me, because Louisville does such a good job. You mentioned with Kentucky with their token pressure. I think that's something they could use to try to slow the game down. Louisville has been really aggressive, pressing in the full court, both full court man, also throwing in some 1-2-1-1, some traps, all this other stuff, which they'll really use Pryor and Roots as kind of blitz guys on screens as well, of trying to pick you up, speed you up, and try to really heat you up with the ball pressure defensively. And they've had a lot of success at that. They struggled in the Kansas game mainly because Darren Peterson is one of the best prospects we've seen in college basketball in a really long time. But what I look at that game and I see, where does Louisville need to grow from that exhibition to this in a real test, is in the second half of that game, Darren Peterson only had 2 points. That's because Louisville was blitzing ball screens. They were being really aggressive, really making him pass the ball. However, Flory Badunga had 9 points. Bryson Tiller had 10. It was a lot of just quick dives to the basket, open ball screens, and Louisville really struggled rotating over. They struggled late on tags on the roll man, things like that. And with Kentucky and the amount of off-ball movement and stuff, everything that Mark Pope loves to do offensively, if Louisville's not dialed in on their rotations on defense, you can see especially, and this is where, again, Kentucky will miss Jaden Quinn since I think he's their best big man at doing this. When Kentucky runs all their zoom actions, runs the pick and roll, they can use their bigs as a pressure release, get a numbers advantage, and try to, if Louisville's slow on rotations, you can get some easy buckets off that with all the stuff that Mark Pope and Kentucky likes to run. That being said, if Jalen Lowe can't handle that pressure, I really like Denzel Aberdeen. He's a really good player. He's not a point guard. Chandler, we talked all about him. I don't think he's a point guard. Owe, as great as he is, very well-deserved SEC preseason player of the year. He's not a primary ball handler. Jalen Lowe's kind of the guy that Mark Pope's begged and said, you need to be the one to facilitate offense and handle ball pressure. Not to say he's going to be trying to beat a full court press 1-on-4 by himself. Of course not. That'd be idiotic. But he, to me, if he's able to handle that ball pressure and get Kentucky into their offense, Kentucky's going to have a much better shot to do everything else they're trying to accomplish. If not, and he's turned the ball over and gets sped up, which, to be fair, completely different rosters, different team for Lowe. Louisville did successfully to Jalen Lowe twice last year when he was at Pittsburgh. That's where this game could become a track meet that Louisville's, running up and down and getting easy shots, getting the threes that they want to get. And that's where the game can sort of tilt in Louisville's favor.
Well, I just hope if there is full court pressure, if they beat that first wave, I hope they attack the basket. When I watch some of these kids and they beat the first pressure, and it's 3-on-2 on the back end, and they pull it out and hand it back to the point guard. That drives me nuts, yeah. Jack. I hope that they will close it out and take the ball to the basket, because that will stop the press quicker than anything.
For sure. And I'd say the other thing, even in the half court as well, will Louisville be able to heat up the ball enough to push Kentucky out a couple feet, get them a little bit farther from the basket to where they want to be running their offense? And that can make it harder for them to play through the post and play through and take advantage of the size advantage that they have. If Louisville's making it hard for them to get the ball to the bigs and putting them out of position to where they can, try to make up some of that size deficit on the glass as well. It's really what I think. I mean, I'm gonna go back to this because, Cam, do you think Blue gets in?
I think an amount of Blue will get in. It's a big gym, Jack.
It is a big gym.
It's a big gym. I'm going to be honest. I saw a few more empty seats than I was expecting. You were there for the South Carolina State game. No, that was a 9 p.m. local time tip. Was a little bit surprised. That's all I'll say.
I'll put it this way. So that South Carolina State game is kind of the same how I felt about UK Valpo. That's one of those games where within the first 2-3 minutes, you're like, we're not going to learn anything out of this.
It's time for the soft serve. It's time for the KFC concessions.
Time for a beer.
Pizza Hut. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. No Lilies in the Yum Center, unfortunately. But
the Louisville fans were saving their money for the Cal football game.
Oh, that was a low blow, Dan.
So I got a great. I've hid this from like the radio and podcasting sphere for many years now, but I have a great Blue Gets In story that I think Dan, you especially will appreciate. If you notice, I hope I don't crop this out of my background. There's a Louisville poster that's in my background here. The reason I have that more than anything else, it's from the 1980s, is because for decades in Freedom Hall, my grandparents had seats right behind the Louisville bench. So in the first row, so you could see, if you every time you turned on a game on Freedom Hall, you would see my grandma and grandpa. Sometimes, later I would be there as like a young kid, and my mom would be there, my aunt and uncle. The reason I bring that up is because for the Louisville Kentucky game, all throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, I had two cousins who my aunt married a Kentucky fan, and their two kids were raised as Kentucky fans. My grandmother had no interest in going to the game. So if you watch any Louisville, Kentucky game throughout the 90s or the 2000s, you will see in the front row, right behind the Louisville bench, my grandfather, and next to him, a kid ranging from like middle school age to young adult, wearing a Kentucky jersey, like behind, like behind the Louisville bench.
That's
So
hysterical.
so blue finds their way in, but I've always thought like the blue gets in thing gets overblown. Like, yes, Kentucky travels as well as anyone in college basketball, if not better. That's that's how that fan base is as Calipari would always say, you people are crazy and all that stuff, and he's right in the best way possible. But and yes, there are always a segment of Kentucky fans in Louisville, but you sit there, yes, with the Kenny Payne, it was like a true 50-50 crowd. It's not traditionally that. I do feel like it gets overblown a little bit to where it's like a 75-25, 80-20 split in most of my experiences with the Louisville Kentucky game. Which I know people love to go nuts about that. But anyways, I want to get back to this. Jalen Lowe. Cam, I get it. He's only played one game, and it was Valparaiso. But I want to get back to this. I truly do think this is going to be one of the biggest games. And Dan, feel free to take away on this as well.
Well, I'm going to disappear for a minute because my battery's running low. I got to go get my charger.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Sounds like the yeah. The bat signal came out for Cam Jack to vamp like this is IU Sports Media in 2017 in Franklin Hall.
We'll talk about some Logan Duncombe.
We do not need to discuss Logan Duncombe at all.
Actually, how was the I want to ask you this. I got to get the plus 600 to cash. How was the burrito tonight?
The burrito was great today.
What was the burrito tonight? For those who don't know, Cam's been doing
please
burrito.
Give some context for the listeners.
Yes, Cam Drummond has been doing burrito week all week.
Burrito Fest. All right,
Burrito Fest. I'm sorry.
Burrito Fest. I'm a big home chef. 15 proprietary burritos, one unique one a day. Today's had butter chicken, crispy potatoes, white rice, and onion. It was actually a nod to the Decatur, Georgia Chai Pani that me and my friend Ben always go to, that you've been to before.
Yes, that place is fantastic.
Indian street food themed burrito, wonderful. We've gone off the rails.
Yes, we have.
Right shoulder injury. We should address that. That's what kept him out for a couple weeks. That's what he injured in the blue-white game. That's what kept him out all the way up until the Valparaiso game. Didn't have to do a ton in the Valpo game. Came off the bench. Kentucky had already established a double-digit lead, but he got his first assists, got his first points as a Wildcat, got some cohesive time on the floor. Not a ton. He only played 17 minutes. But that's actually been a hallmark of Pope's team with the depth, simply that no one's had to play a ton of time. And if things work well, nobody will have to shoulder too much of the load, which you maybe couldn't have said last year. All I have to say, another huge bet that Kentucky made in the transfer poll this year was zeroing in on Jalen Lowe pretty early on as their point guard of the future. A lot of that's because he took a pretty big regression in certain statistical categories last year at Pittsburgh compared to his freshman year and compared to the normal freshman and sophomore year jump. Pitt's roster was a disaster last year. The idea being that Lowe comes to Kentucky surrounded by better players, athletes, better shooters. That's going to open up a ton better scoring opportunities for him, his teammates. Pope's talked about how he took some of like the 90th percentile amount of hardest shots, most difficult shots per analytics data that they're available. First big test is going to be against Louisville. Hasn't had a whole lot of time in game action with his teammates. You know, really a preeminent point guard matchup. Him against Michael Brown Jr. is going to be fascinating to watch. There's going to be some areas where I think Louisville can punish Lowe a bit on defense. Obviously, he's going to have to be really attuned on offense, helping facilitate that ball movement. Jack, you've probably watched a little bit more of Louisville than me this year. It seems like Brown's been a bit turnover happy as well. I believe he had 6 in that Jackson State game, 3 against South Carolina State. Just the way both these teams play with the tempo, the amount of shots, the types of shots they want, assist to turnover ratio, especially in Kentucky's case under Pope, really tells the tale of if they were functioning well, moving correctly, cutting in the right way on offense or not. I think Tuesday is going to be another kind of litmus test for that. Jalen Lowe being the head of the stake, both on offense and defense, he's got to be up to the task. You mentioned, kind of what's going to happen if any kind of full court pressure or physicality on behalf of either backcourt really will go a long way into discombobulating both offenses. It might force some of the big men into, obviously, we've seen Pope use big men as offensive hubs before. We saw that even with Malachi Moreno against Valpo, Amari Williams last year. Brandon Garrison's got some decent hands and some level of passing skill and ability. But if either team's point guard isn't able to handle the kind of physicality and pressure, we might see some of these front court guys really have to display their passing, ball handling ability. And that could become something that sink or swim, assists or turnovers goes on to define who wins the game.
I think you'd see it in different ways. I think with Kentucky, you'd see more of the front court guys get involved. With Louisville, they have such a sheer amount of guards. I mean, yes, Case and Pryor can handle the ball. Some Khalifa, you can facilitate and use him in the high post. They will definitely do that. But when you have as many guys as Louisville has that can handle the ball and really be a primary point of attack offensively, when Khalifa's not in the game, I don't think you're going to see that as much, is what I would add there. But I do think, though, with Kentucky, that to me is a huge question, because we saw the two exhibition games. I don't know how much you can take away from them, but it is notable.
Got some theories on Matt Painter's preparation level for Purdue's exhibition.
Well, yeah, first of all, Purdue's lost an exhibition 3 years in a row, and it has not mattered one bit. But just the way Matt Painter plays, and Purdue's a very well-deserving preseason #1 team in the country. Braden Smith is the best player coming into the season in college basketball. That is incredibly well-deserved. They're very physical on the inside. They play more of a pack line style defense, so they're not going to pressure the ball a lot. They're not the most athletic team. Georgetown, which may be better than we thought they were. I mean, they went and whipped Maryland pretty good over the weekend as well, but they were much more aggressive defensively, much more athletic. And Kentucky, you have to point out, without Aberdeen and Lowe, that's a big caveat, did struggle with that. I think Louisville's going to test them to see, okay, yes, you got these two guys back, but are you able to handle that?
I will say one thing, Jack. Smith's got a better beard than you do.
That's not saying much. All right, so let me ask you guys this before we get out of here. Dan, we'll start with you. We'll go both ways. Louisville wins the game if what happens? Kentucky wins the game if what happens?
Yeah, Kentucky wins the game if they shoot a decent percentage and can slow down Louisville's fast break. Louisville wins the game if the backcourt guys for Kentucky. And I've never seen, if I saw Lowe play last year with Pittsburgh, I don't remember it, Jack. And so, he needs to be the guy in my mind, because as you referenced, Owe isn't a point guard. Chandler certainly isn't a point guard. And you put those guys in those positions, and you just you reveal their downfalls. And so to me, Lowe is the key to this game. And Louisville wins the game if their backcourt can get to the bucket and make some easy baskets.
Yeah, kind of going off that, I'm isolating this in kind of two categories. I can't follow your simple instruction, Jack, so I'm just going to
go for it.
Louisville's got the backcourt advantage. Kentucky has the front court advantage.
Agreed.
One of those advantages exceeds the other, right? I'm going to give some credit. I don't want to get out of this podcast without talking about Mohamed Diabate and Brandon Garrison.
I like Diabate a lot. I think he's a
going
really
to
good
be
player.
Kentucky's starting 4 and 5. Diabate, through 2 games and obviously a lot of offseason of work at the Joe Kraft Center, has really embodied that tenacity, the physicality, the grit, some of the maybe ugly, dark arts of the game that Kentucky was missing last year, frankly. That, in these SEC battles, when they were getting shoved around at Ole Miss and Georgia and Texas, schools that shouldn't have been doing that to them, Diabate is going to make up for that a ton inside. And we've seen some real improvement from Brandon Garrison, especially on the defensive end so far this season. Again, grain of salt with the opponents, but I feel like he's moving his feet better. He's not getting sealed off. He's being just a really active defender. He's also kind of reined in his offensive game a little bit, and part of that's just come from starting at the 5 in place in theory of Jaden Quaintance. But he's not taking as many 3-pointers, which is a skill he has, but really staying in his lane, doing some stuff around the rim, dunker spot, rim protection, all that stuff. So that's Kentucky's advantage. I think Louisville's advantage, both from what they did at their previous schools, the tempo they've played at, and the shot making they've had so far this season, is in the backcourt. You're talking about some of the best 3-point shooters in the country. If you're letting guys like Conwell, Isaac McNeely, who, goodness, I covered as a recruit at Indiana back in the day, obviously Michael Brown
Tell
Jr.
me Archie Miller didn't land him.
Archie Miller did not land Isaac McNeely, not in the first go around, and certainly not the second go around at Rhode Island. All that to say, Louisville's backcourt, dynamic, shot making, elite. If they get going, and you got to think about this too, if they're hitting threes early and they're getting out to a lead, that's just going to continue to swell the environment in there. If, Isaac McNeely and Brown and Conwell combine to make, I don't know, 6 3-pointers in the first 5 minutes of the game, then holy smokes, the lid's going to be going off that place. And that puts Kentucky in even more of a precarious situation. So all that to say, if the front court is going to be what decides this game, Kentucky's going to win. If the back court's going to be what decides this game, Louisville's going to win. And I got to say right now, speaking on Sunday night, I think I'm leaning back court, and I think I'm leaning Louisville in this one.
I'm with you. I mean, when it comes down to it, I would rather have the backcourt than the front court. I think you can impact the game and dictate the way you play the game in more ways when you have the better backcourt. Not to say that Kentucky can't impose their will on the front court, especially on the glass and in the paint, but the way Louisville wants to spread you out and all that things, I do think that I would rather try to dictate things with the guards in the modern game.
You just hit the nail right on the head, Jack. The modern game. I didn't think I'd ever hear anybody. You two guys are too young to remember this, but I never thought I'd hear anybody say that having a better backcourt is an advantage over having.
So why do you? Because I know back in the day, obviously, when you were playing, it was Kareem, Wilt Chamberlain, Artis Gilmore. Later on, Moses Malone, Akeem Olajuwon. Why has obviously I think guys named Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan had a lot to do with it, but why has that changed so much in your lifetime?
It's all the 3-point shot. I mean, it used to be the 2-point shot. I mean, people used to think, 3 is more than 2. I get it, but 2 is more than 0 too. And so it was all about low post play, good footwork. Akeem Olajuwon, you mentioned him, Jack. He had the best footwork of any player I've ever seen. He was incredible getting the ball on the low post. It's all about the 3-point shot. I played in the highest scoring NBA game in history. The Denver Nuggets against the Detroit Pistons. Triple overtime. It was 180 something to 180 something. You know how many 3-point shots were taken and made in that game?
I think I know this actually. Was it 2 for each team?
Yeah, both teams were 1 for 2.
Well done, Cam.
Both teams were 1 for 2
That's insane.
from the 3-point in the highest scoring game. But now it's people. I mean, if they can see the basket from 3-point line, it's going up. So that's what's changed.
What was it like? And I'm fine taking this completely off the rails here, because this was honestly, when I was in radio, one of my favorite things to do was when I got to host with Dan, and we would just go and just talk about, Dan's playing career and coaching career and all that stuff. I have, just as an aside, like a 20-minute segment just saved on my desktop of us talking about that type of stuff. It's something I really honestly cherish, to be completely honest. But what was it like, Dan, playing in that game?
Well, it was crummy because we actually lost. The Pistons beat us. But we had a team of Alex English, who was the leading scorer in the NBA in the 80s. From 1980 to 1989, Alex English was the leading scorer in the NBA. Kiki Vanderway was an unbelievable offensive player. We couldn't guard our shadows. And so the way the way that we won was if the three of us got 90 points together and somebody else chipped in 10 or 12. And so that's why in a triple overtime game, that's why we had that many points.
Well, what was it at? No, you go ahead, Cam. You go ahead.
Well, I was going to say real quick to tie this back to the Kentucky Louisville game. I suppose we kind of could have just simmed to the end of our conversation by saying also whichever team catches fire from the 3-point line is very liable to win this game because you're probably going to see an excess of 63 pointers attempted, whether that's evenly split or maybe slightly skewed towards Louisville. If one of these teams is just on an absolute heater on Tuesday night and hits 45%, 50% of their threes, it might be an open and shut case closed discussion for who wins.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why you see more blowouts, especially on the NBA side, than we used to see, because there's so much more of a variance of if you're hitting the three ball or not, to where if one team's hitting them, the other team's not, and you don't have a lot of backup plans, it can become a long night for one of the teams very quickly. I don't expect Tuesday night to be a blowout. I think it's going to be a really, really fun game to watch, but that chance is always there, especially with how 3-point dependent these two teams are.
Well, if Kentucky isn't shooting the 3-point well, I hope they, at what point do you quit shooting? 0 for 12, 0 for 15, 0 for 20? I mean, at some point, start taking the ball to the basket. My goodness.
Yeah. All right,
well, let's also not forget that last year we did this entire podcast, obviously with James Streeple, who's omitted this year for personal obligations included. And I think we barely discussed Lamont Butler, or at least we only discussed Lamont Butler in the context of
will he play or not?
Not play. I believe he was dealing with an ankle injury at the time. And he only went out and went 6 for 6 from 3-point range, scored a career high 33 points, and was frankly the reason that Kentucky came away with an 8-point win. So
if I remember correctly, Dan said he'd be on the naughty list if he didn't play. That's one of the best quotes we've had in the podcast.
It's too early in the season for load management, guys.
Yeah, no, I agree.
True. That's true.
I agree. So one last thing before we get out of here, though, because I'm picking Louisville to win. Cam's picked Louisville to win. Dan, are you picking before I get to my question here? Are you picking Louisville or Kentucky to win this game?
What kind of question is that? I wouldn't pick Louisville over to Kentucky if we had to play 5 guys that were 5'6". Are you kidding me?
Just wanted to make sure. But with how the rivalry has gone for Louisville, and I asked Coach Lieberman this too, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. So Louisville's trying to bring itself back to relevance against Kentucky in this rivalry. They haven't won a game since 2021 in the rivalry, which that was the COVID year weird thing. How much pressure in a year where Louisville's a bona fide top 10 team? Yes, Kentucky's really good as well, but Louisville's at home. They have a great roster. How much pressure is there on Louisville to win this game? Because I think there's a lot more pressure on them than there is for Kentucky on Tuesday.
Yeah, probably, Jack, just because of what you said. They're home. They didn't go quite as far as Kentucky did last year. And so I agree. I think there's more pressure on Louisville to win. But I'll say this. I'm one of those weird birds that I root for Louisville when they're not playing Kentucky, because I think it is absolutely terrific for all of the fans, Louisville fans, Kentucky fans, basketball fans, when both of these programs are in the top 10. And that's what we've got this year. And so it'll be great. And obviously I'm pulling for Kentucky, but I'm happier that both of these teams are relevant again.
Well, to piggyback off Dan's thoughts, well, first off, it's tremendous that, we filled an hour-long podcast here, however long we've gone, with real substantive talk about a basketball game that's going to be competitive in what should be a tremendous environment, 20,000 people strong, loud, engaging, fun styles of play. Like, all that stuff is wonderful. Now, the other point, and I promise I'm not trying to troll or anything. Again, like I'm a Kentucky, I cover Kentucky. I'm picking Louisville to win this basketball game. I want to be very clear about that. Secondly, but going off that, what is Pat Kelsey's biggest win at Louisville?
Off the top of my head, they beat Clemson, who was a 5 seed, a Carolina team that wasn't very good, and Clemson again in the ACC tournament. And
Top 15
yeah,
Indiana team last year. Obviously, Indiana turned out to
yeah,
be
that was not a top 15
a,
Indiana
a,
team. They were at the time, but
a
that was
wet
a
pile of
good
mush. My
basketball
point with
team.
that
Yeah.
being, it's year two. There's certainly raised expectations for Louisville this year. Pat Kelsey needs a signature win. I'm not saying he's on the hot seat or anything like that, but I think Louisville fans, you need a win against a legitimate team to validate what they've done, what they've spent in the transfer portal, the juice that exists around the program, the juice that exists around not wasting your year with Michael Brown, a top 10 lottery pick. Like, I think you would really benefit from something, Louisville that is like a flag planted in the ground kind of win, getting your footing back in this rivalry. Which I was actually digging up some old quotes, and this is a very much a cliche, but Kelsey saying last year in the lead up to last year's game, it's only a rivalry if both teams win, right? It's the truest cliche in sports, and I think
Yep.
Louisville fans really feel like it's their time to climb back into this rivalry. I guess to make it a rivalry again, just because the way recent years have gone, and I think whatever happens on Tuesday night, especially a Cardinal victory, would go a long way in that. And so I would agree with you, Jack. Is it pressure in terms of anyone's job or what's going to happen in the Final Four of the NCAA tournament? No. But I think this could be a potential inflection point in the rivalry truly being back with Louisville holding court at home.
Right. At some point, Louisville has to get off the mat and win one of these games. And what I mean, one of these games, like they're going to have other opportunities to win big games throughout the year because, yeah, they get Duke twice. I believe they get Carolina twice. They get NC State, who I think is going to be pretty good. They get Arkansas and Tennessee in the non con.
Baylor.
Yeah, Baylor as well in February. But Louisville fans are so starved right now to beat Kentucky in basketball that's one to where again I agree. Like obviously, no one's calling for his job or anything like that. That would be absolutely idiotic. But at some point, you have to get the monkey off your back if you're Pat Kelsey in Louisville. And it seems like that even with how good Kentucky is this year, and for full disclosure, again, I put both of these teams in my preseason Final Four. I'm really high on both of them. They're going to be a blast to watch all year. But when you're at home, Kentucky's not fully healthy. This feels like a strike while the iron's hot type of deal to try to get. The other thing is because you're at home, Louisville hasn't beaten Kentucky in Rupp Arena since I was in fourth grade, which I'm almost 28 now, so it's been a while.
People forget that
Which
you do fourth grade three times.
what?
So people forget that you had to do the fourth grade three times.
Actually, it was four
Dan,
times. Yeah,
Dan's laughing.
I mean, yeah, I mean you're not wrong. Norton Elementary, baby. But Louisville, for me, yes, eventually you do have to win in Rupp Arena again, obviously. But so much of this, if you just can take care, hold court at home, and start winning that game in the Yum Center consistently, that's the first step to me to try to make this a more even rivalry than what it's been really since Calipari got the job at Kentucky, because they've really owned Louisville in the series, especially with the Mac and Kenny Payne eras as well, where it's become incredibly lopsided. The other interesting thing, Louisville's won 4 times since since Tubby Smith, since they last won Rupp Arena in 2008. Those 4 times, each time they've won, one, it was a home game, but two, they won by exactly 3 points. It has been since 2008 since Louisville has beaten Kentucky by more than a single possession. That is
Wow.
insane. That is
Yep.
absolutely insane. So obviously, yes, any win is a win, but if you're able to win and kind of get that really random weird thing away, also that would be probably helpful for Louisville. But any win is a win is for either of these teams in a rivalry game. That's for sure. So Dan, Cam, I really, really, really appreciate you guys hopping on, having an absolute blast here talking Louisville, Kentucky, Battle of the Bluegrass. Going to be an absolute clash of titans in the KFC Yum Center on Tuesday night. Cam will be there. He may be scared for his life for no other reason except for past prejudices that he has, but but we're going to have a lot of fun there with this game. Guys, really appreciate the time. Hope everyone enjoys the game Tuesday night. And Coach Lieber and I should be back probably on Wednesday to break down whatever the heck happens in the